Center for Photography at Woodstock. As you can see, you are surrounded by our current exhibition right now called Lost Kingston, which features photographs by Gene Dauner. It was right here. I think everyone knows. And we have our curator here tonight, Stephen Blauweiss, curator of this show. So thank you for coming. My name is Sarah Danziger. I am the education program manager here at CPW. If you don't already know, we are I think you can, right there, perfect. We are a photography center. We have exhibitions. We have weekly artist talks that are free, just like this, normally on Thursdays. We have recently relaunched our print services over at our new home on 25 Diedrich Street. Many of you maybe know it as the old NNS Plumbing Supply. My parents are like, oh, the old plumbing supply place. Yeah, I know that. So that's our new home. And eventually over the next year, you'll see a lot of our programming start to shift over there. We have a digital lab over there, and we have workshops that we'll be announcing soon. So please keep an eye on what we've got. And we'll also be returning here on the 16th for, we don't have a Meet the Artist on this Thursday, but we have one the following week with Raymond Meeks, and he'll be joined by George Wald, which will be really exciting. I'm going to read a little bit about Gene and Stephen, and then I'll let them get going. Gene Dauner, born in 1944, is a Kingston native and highly skilled and self-taught amateur photographer. He began recording the city's architecture of Kingston in 1967, when much of it, especially in the Rondout, was being destroyed by Urban Renewal. Taking time from his father's florist business and later from his work at the post office, Dauner made over 50,000 slides of Kingston and its environments. This is the first major exhibition of Dauner's photography. Did you write this? How should we correct it?
Well, it's the 8th one in 8 years, but it's in its own right wonderfully, beautifully presented by all of us, and CPW did an amazing job at it, and it is definitely one of the most excellent presentations I've heard.
Great. The first one at CPW. This is the first major exhibition of Dauner's photography at CPW.
That's my entire body of work.
That's
my life. That's everything from Key West to Alaska.
Amazing. About Stephen Blauweiss. Stephen Blauweiss is an independent filmmaker, historian, and graphic designer. He specializes in topics related to the art and history of the Hudson Valley, but his work covers a wide variety of subjects from art and education to social and environmental issues. He has produced over 75 short films, including 3 features. Blauweiss and his partner, Karen Borelowitz, did I say that right? Borelowitz? Have published 2 books, The Life and Death of Kingston Post Office and The Story of Historic Kingston. He co-produced and co-directed the 2016 documentary Lost Rondout, A Story of Urban Renewal. If you haven't seen it, I suggest you do get out there and check it out. All right, thank you. Without further ado.
So we have a little more business too here. And you're going to actually, if you don't, has anyone not seen Lost Rondout here? Wow. Okay. Well, you're going to see an extra 3.5 minutes tonight. Good timing. Sarah, you want to start again for them? Okay. A couple of things. So thank you everyone for coming. So basically, as Sarah mentioned, that was just slightly off, but still this is a unique presentation of Gene's work, certainly. But even before Lost Rondout was completed, I started presenting the work, and we've done roughly about 1 a year over the last 8 years. Just in case, so there's some of the paraphernalia or tchotchkes, whichever you prefer, you have on your seat. So I'm currently in production on a new feature documentary called Sharky and His Pals, and you can see a ton of things we started already. We have little segment samples, and it's about the most famous sea lions in the world were trained in Kingston, New York for 50 years. And they were in an Abbott and Costello movie. They were on Broadway, one of them in particular acting by himself and tricks. It's really lovely, especially with all the craziness of the world now. It's a very uplifting an interesting, unique story. And then my website is hudsonvalleyhistoryandart.com. It should be on a lot of these. It's not on the Sharkey one is its own site, sharkeyandhispals.com, but the other stuff you have, we also has the website. So hudsonvalleyhistoryandart.com. So these are about 40 of the films that Sarah mentioned, that I have about 100 of the short films nowadays. And then the photography in particular, you might be interested in. There's a whole bunch, some of my favorites, if some of you might know Carolyn Marks Blackwood, that does amazing abstractions from her perch in Rhinecliff, Elliot Landy, Mickey Mathis, Gene, etc. And plus some other thing, women artists and many other shorts. Just a reminder about Lost Rondout, if you haven't seen it in a while, or if you'd like to tell someone else, it is available on Amazon. It is Amazon Prime, but you don't need the Prime, and it's just $6, and Amazon gets $3, and Lynn and I split $3, and we get $1.50. So, Bezos, no. Okay, and I just want to remind everyone about the book that Sarah mentioned. There's some postcards here. If you haven't seen the book yet, we're going to get a little sneak peek at the end, because there's some of Gene's photographs are really highlighted in the book, which has actually almost 1,000 images, mostly photographs in it, including lots of great history. And then one more thing. For the last couple of years, I've been doing these displays that are around. In fact, one is right next door at Monkey Joe, and there's about 20 uptown, and they're a little larger than that. They're 4 feet tall by 2 feet, and this is only for uptown right now, but I have a map that's what you have. So it's a self-guided tour, and it's kind of like the book, except you're standing in front of the building that the history is about. They're all different, and if you're uptown, keep an eye on those. That one is about Senate Garage, and there's one of Gene's shots. We'll see some of that history tonight. And then that's the one that's next door, the old pharmacy. And what's really neat, which I point out, is like the reflection in the window. So you see like the back of a bus. And so you cross from where the bus station was, which we're going to see in a minute. Gene's iconic shot that's right here in this window. That was literally, just if you remember, next time you drive by, or that if you walk across the street, you have to go a little that way, but basically if you just walk directly across the street, the shot that you'll see in a minute is the one. This is basically the map, is the view, and I'll remind you when we get there. And I think I'm gonna now go to our clips, and I just put these kind of together. So this is, we're starting with a little piece of a short film that I did of Gene, like what I call these artist profiles that I just showed you that are on the website, of all different kinds of artists, a lot of photographers. So a little piece of that, which my favorite thing about doing these artist films and profiles are you get to hear the artist's philosophy and in conjunction with their work. And then it happens to be exactly the opening, the first 3.5 minutes of Lost Rondout, which is primarily Gene. You'll see a little bit of historian Bill Rhodes talking about Gene's work, and we'll start with that.
It goes back to when I was a kid. My parents and I used to go on these rides together on Sundays, and I was always fascinated by what we were seeing. They always seemed to have some interesting story to say, and that piqued my interest to want to know more and so forth. Because this area, with the type of history it has around here, is filled with interesting things. That was one of the things that they made a point of, and it was obvious to anybody who saw it, is that things were changing very rapidly on all fronts. This is the only thing that anybody could do, let alone me, and preserve it, was to photograph it. I've always felt that I had to take my pictures in kind of a measured way. I was more of a documentary photographer than I was an artistic photographer. You either come down on one side or the other. Either you're going to be an artist or you're going to be a documenter. And I always felt that I was a documentary photographer person. I tried to bring in artistic elements. I tried to keep good composure, and I was always big for dramatic lighting. I liked dramatic lighting. It wasn't an easy thing to get, but I wouldn't take a picture unless the lighting was right. Very seldom would I take a picture or bother with things if they weren't going well in the lighting department. I would come back later on. I would pre-envision what was the good lighting for this subject. And that's why I got good lighting on my pictures most of the time, is because I just wouldn't settle for anything less. So much was happening that you couldn't confine yourself to just one front. I mean, you would have different projects would come and go, like the Rondout project. The railroad became a big vehicle for change to me, simply because the Ulster Delaware Railroad was still around, still running trains, still there, but it was on its way out. Everybody knew that. Technologically, when the steam engines went over to diesels, what a change that was. All the different buildings and things and shops and so forth were abandoned and torn down. There was so much action with the railroads, they made them interesting right off the bat. Barns are a particular example that are good because it's very hard to keep a barn once the farm is gone. The reason and need for the barn fades, and it's a big building. They're very picturesque. Books and all kinds of things have been written about barns, and everybody loved the old barns. And most of them are gone now, unless it's a working farm that has had the maintenance and so forth that the barns need continually. Other things, too, in the infrastructure of roadside life, such as the bridges that were built in the 1880s and 1890s. Iron bridges that went across the creeks and things up through the Catskills. These little truss bridges are all gone now because they wouldn't support the weight of modern-day equipment. There are so many places today where you had beautiful vistas even as late as 50 years ago because of the way the land was cleared and used for farming and so forth that you no longer have. Know this, take your pictures because things are going to change, whether it's some arsonist or the 100-year storm or the march of technology, it's going to change. I was always curious as to what I was looking at, the background behind it. Kind of like Paul Harvey used to have that saying, now you know the rest of the story. And that's the way I always wanted to know the rest of the story.
So we'll see almost all of those images, but what's behind them and the stories behind them. Now a little clip. Also, I've restored all of these images, every last one, just countless hours, out of the love of it over the last 10 years. And everything in the show, even things that I had restored, I went back in and remastered them to get them even more. So here's just a little opening of Lost Rondout to remind everyone.
Well, I've been all over the country in one time or another, and I have never seen any town that kept its homogeneity from a period that far back as Rondout did. It was just like it all stood still in time and stayed that way, rather than been rebuilt. No tasteless eyesores in Rondout. It may have been what they called a slum, but to me, it was an absolute jewel. So what I would do is I would time my visits down there to when I was delivering flowers or something for the florist business that my father had. And I would say, oh, the lighting is pretty good on Canfields. Right now is the time to go. So I used to carry my camera with me. I'd run down there and I'd get these great shots. And I'm thinking, well, I got just so much time. I got to keep it one step ahead of the wrecking ball here. So that made the entire body of work look rather better than it would have if I had just approached it haphazard. Most places, when they decline in fits and spurts. In Rondout, it started very early, much earlier than most towns. There was no retrofitting of more modern architectural elements on these buildings. I mean, it was still the original stuff. 600 structures went down. But what would happen is they'd tear down one big building and this would open up views of another building that was never attainable before because you couldn't stand in that spot before. The architecture that was all torn down through Urban Renewal was mostly built pre and post Civil War. That's amazing. It was a real neighborhood, it really was.
The decision during Urban Renewal time to obliterate so much of the late 19th century architecture of the area was a tragic decision. If I had been a city father in the 1960s, I might well have voted in favor of urban renewal. but with perfect hindsight, it was a terrible mistake. Gene Dauner's slides really hit home in terms of the importance of the architecture we have lost in the urban renewal of the 1960s. Partly it's individual buildings, but more it's the streetscape totality of the neighborhood, the long rows of 2- and 3-story brick commercial buildings.
That was one of the things that used to bother me in the long moments waiting for a train to take a picture of, or why am I here? What am I doing this for? What's it going to be like, when I'm older? And now I'm starting to see people's reactions are nice. It's really a real nice feeling to see people interested in these things. If it comes down to anything, a lot of people felt the same thing all along that I did. They cared about it.
That was the last couple of minutes of it. Still holds up, And, okay, now I just want to, I thought I had one of those, can I borrow somebody's booklet that you have here? Booklet. So this is compliments of CPW. And actually, so the short film I actually did the same year that Lost Rondout came out, 2016, of Gene. And we were going to do a book actually before the post office book and years before, and the Kingston book. I wanted to do a book with Gene, and so I asked him to write some things. So this is this compliments of CPW. So that if you don't have it on your chair, there are some extra ones. I wrote a little opening to it, and then Gene wrote. So if you heard him mention, he goes, "One step ahead of the wrecking ball." That is his line there, and he sort of gives a little background that we won't go that much into tonight, but you have this to read later. And now we can actually start. So this is in the booklet. You'll see one of the, and here's the first shot.
Well, this picture here is a good example of how you make an instantaneous decision that you never thought you were going to get. I had gone up to where this is the old YMCA building in the background there, and although there was no plan to tear it down or anything, I always thought it'd be a great study around 8 o'clock in the morning, early, and on a Sunday. This was on a Sunday. There was nobody hardly at all on the road. Good time to get it. So I had done my photography for the Y, and my car was parked right up here by the old Kingston Auditorium, the Andy Murphy Center, and I'm walking back. And I just happened to turn around and I said, "Oh, that's a great shot. That's a great combination of elements and perspectives and everything." So I grabbed it. It was a pure grab shot. And I went back to the car and went on. It illustrates that a lot of the stuff wasn't as planned as you might think it was. There was a lot of serendipity in all of this photography I did. And that turned out to be kind of like an emblem shot of my body of work, my collection, and it was all done just as an instantaneous grab shot.
But as you'll find out, he really does plan the shots important, and we'll see what he was shooting before that. One thing, when I do these on my own, these presentations, I like to say that, it's amazing. It's almost as though he art directed it, where you have, it's funny that he says that it was just, he turned around and said, "What's that behind me?" But, the way that the color of the sign, the cab, I always say, it's like, "Come on, up, okay, hold it. Now you run out and get a can of red paint for the grill on the bottom of the basement," But anyway.
That's the one thing about the elements and principles of design. One of the most important ones, but it's also one of the most easily overlooked, is the element of repetition. Repetition goes a long ways to make your pictures interesting. And the red Stephen talks about is a classic case. And you kind of tend to have that stuff ingrained in you. It's almost like embedded in your psyche, so to speak, when you're a photographer. You just automatically do it. You don't think about it.
So here we have just a handful, about a half a dozen through the whole presentation of a few historical photographs. So I'm going to step out. Can I borrow your mic, Gene?
Sure.
So basically, we're right here, this little building right there. Across here's the armory, and you can see the post office here. Here's the bus station. So on that corner was the sign. Here's the Y that we were just seeing in the background. This is about 1951. They're just finishing the underpass there. You can see the other side is not even completed at all. The roadbed is here. Shirt factory is up in that corner. The baseball field is where the replacement post office that's there today. And Fuller Building is over here, is right here. And then Stan Zaborski right here gives you a little sense of where we're at. So these next photographs, whoops, sorry. It's a little tight here. So again, we are right here, right now. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for reminding me right here. They just bought that building last year and they're going to turn it into a wonderful arts photography center right on Dietrich Street. Here, G. Four-story one. This one right here. This guy, Dietrich Street goes right just to the left of the Millard Building. All right.
Yep, that's the post office, of course, and it was one of the biggest losses that Kingston ever had, for architecturally speaking. And it was the galvanizing thing that made everybody say enough when it came to demolition, when it came to losing your landmarks. And they were still there. I think they were still running then, they hadn't gone to the new building yet, I don't think.
That's 67. That was like the
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
They actually moved 2 years before it was torn down.
And this is Broadway, of course, taken from Scott Dutton's new gallery building, right in front of that building. And WBAZ up here was one of the three, I believe it was three major radio stations in town at the time: WGHQ, WKNY, and WBAZ. And all those buildings are gone now, except for the Armory, way in the distance. And of course, the old, well, it used to be the Broadway News Shop right there on the very far left. And this is one of those shots that I took of the Y that morning. I took the bus sign. As you can see, the bus, the sign, the time on the sign is almost 8 o'clock, and the time on the sign and the other shot was 5 after. I was finishing up. Another shot there.
And this shows how Gene, he calls himself a documenter, which I agree with, but he also, I feel there's an artistic side, which he did intimate it, but I think he has more than he gives himself credit for. But also the documenter side, where he took many times where different angles, the details, and really documented it.
That building eventually burned in 1991, and it was totally destroyed on the inside. You just tore it down after that.
And I put these slightly out of order. Normally, I would start with Uptown, then go to Midtown, Downtown, but I thought it'd be nice to start where we are. Now we're just going to jump, and these are these images right here of Uptown.
Yep, this is up on the corner of Hurley Avenue, where the bank is, where the gas station is now, or where the bank is now in the gas station. And these two buildings are still in existence on Hurley Avenue and the old firehouse. And it was a neat little corner and interesting part of town known as Higginsville. There's, as you know, Kingston had all kinds of neighborhoods with names, and names that sounded like they would have their own post office. Higginsville was, this is the corner, the Higginsville corner.
So this is we're on Washington Avenue. There's a little triangle there, that annoying light that you just miss it with the two banks on either side of you. That's where that is. And now this is the opposite side. So if you were heading away from the circle on the left, where the pharmacy is today, just before the bus station, that's this.
Yeah, this would be right across the street from the other picture, only this is in the afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that particular time of the year. And I can remember going in there as a kid, getting bait for going fishing with my uncle, and it was obviously an old time store from years ago, but it was, the entire store was a bait shop. And well, back before I was in high school, back through the 50s. What was in there before? It was a variety of things. That's one of the things that's interesting studying the old places like this, and you get out the old directories of the town, and you can find out all the previous things that were in there. But that's a very old story. It goes back pre-Civil War.
And that area of Higginsville, which also happened to be an African-American neighborhood, was completely wiped out. People don't realize it was an uptown urban renewal that was mostly selective, but that part of where you come into Washington was completely wiped out.
That brick building on the on the far left, that's McConnell's old bar. I can remember going in there and seeing Gene Pitney performing live in there one night years ago. And that's the Shanty store.
Top of Fair.
Yeah, yeah, and of course that's where the little pocket park is now. And I can remember the inside of it was just as funky as the outside. You went inside there and everything was in bins. There was no, nothing was hanging on hangers or any of the conventional trappings of clothing stores was not in that building. It was basically an old house that was turned into a store, decades before these pictures were taken. And the whole thing was in wooden bins. And you picked out your jeans out of the bin, and the place was in a constant disarray simply because of the bin situation.
And we'll see more in a moment. So this is North Front on the left, Top of Fair. That's the Senate Garage, as most of you recognize, on the left. And then Gene's other, as among many, but super iconic shot, which you see here, and we have it in the book too. It reminds me of an Edward Hopper painting. And this is among our half a dozen then and now. And as Gene mentioned, the little park there, the little to the right. And now we're into Rondout. And so right here, this little orange circle, oddly enough, even though this is from the late 19th century, that map, that's the area that was designated and was torn down in Rondout, that we will concentrate on a teeny portion. We're going to see about maybe 60 photographs out of Gene's 900 of Rondout out of his 50,000 photographs of different subjects.
That was just strictly what they called the Broadway East Urban Renewal area. It was just in this area here. But of course, there was a vast amount of rest of Rondout too, which some of the pictures you've already seen. But I concentrated on that area because that was the area that everything was being torn down. It was like a total scorched earth situation, every single thing. And it was supposed to have been, I remember the article in the paper, it was supposed to have been 600 buildings were in that red area. And that includes every kind of outhouse too you can think of, but there's still buildings. And but I didn't just do anything just strictly there. I concentrated a lot on it because you knew the mortality rate was total. But back out on the Beale Street and up in the neighborhoods of Ravine and Hone and so forth, there was a lot of great architecture. And I included that too. I did a lot of work up in there. And that's also part of the 900 that Stephen refers to.
And you can see the railroad here, which we'll see little parts of it a couple of times. Coming down, the U&D made this big curve down the hill. And then we're going to see this little part right here coming down on, this is Mill Street. And we'll still seeing this and back here, among other things. And this is a Len Tantillo painting of the late 19th century. So just to give you a little teeny background, basically it was, once the D&H Canal opened in 1828, they built it in 3 years. It started in 25, the same year that the Erie Canal was finished. This was started about a mile down at Eddyville. And that was what created this bustling neighborhood and village, really, which came to combine in 1872 with Kingston in general. So now we'll see the decline of it 100 years later.
This is a shot taken from the what we call today the Word Street Bridge, the old 9W Bridge. Actually, this is two photographs that were combined. Stephen combined them with the wonderful work that he does to, do make these kinds of panoramas by combining pictures that, are separate shots. And there's a few of those that we have down here tonight to see. This picture here is two different slides. And I used to do that quite a lot when I was taking the pictures, because you would get these wonderful panoramas and these, you didn't have the equipment back then. This was just a little simple used 35 millimeter Argus that I was dealing with no special lenses, no filters, no nothing, but real good film. Kodachrome was the best thing to do. If I was shooting Ektachrome back in these years, we all wouldn't be sitting here tonight, because it just did not last. Kodachrome was just like walking into it. And these pictures, you got to remember, this particular picture was taken in 1967. And it was just, so often have these panoramas. Sometimes I would take as many as 4 pictures and he would stitch them all together. There's one in the background there, in the back, the one you've seen with all the buildings with the plywood on the front.
And we'll see it
That
again.
was 4 photographs. You will see it, yeah. That was 4 photographs that he stitched together.
And this one, last night, I was up really late and till 5 a.m, just putting together last minute things and what else could I add? What else could I add? And there are things that I only discovered like 5 years ago, years after we finished Lost Rondout. I said, gee, this is a panorama I didn't realize, because we would scan them in when we did it. I forgot to mention one thing that I want to mention, which I'm going to do in a second. But so I actually just did this last night. Gene only saw this an hour ago for the first time from when he shot it
an hour ago.
over 50 years ago is one shot. I also want to mention that I put it in here also, but it's exactly 10 years ago, almost to the day. I don't know if it was October, November, that my colleague on Lost Rondout, Lynn Woods, who was working on some urban renewal things just before we started on that project, and she said that Gene is showing some of these photographs down at the Maritime Museum. And so it was exactly 10 years ago, almost to the day, to the week, that I first got introduced to Gene. And it'll be this January, 10 years that we started on the film.
Oh, here's another one. This is what, 2 or 3 pictures?
Just
Stephen?
two.
Just two. And this was taken from what used to be the old Van Horn Nursing Home, which was originally the Slate Mansion on the Slatesburg side of the creek. And it was a great shot late in the afternoon, of course, with the trees, with that very spooky type of atmosphere that they create in the foreground. And this was taken before the first building had been torn down. This was taken in '65, and one of my first Rondout pictures in color. I had been taking Rondout stuff black and white for 10 years before this, but this was one of my very first films that I used did color work. It was November, I believe, looking at it. November of '65.
And on the right here, this is where the Maritime Museum is today.
Yep.
This is Hasbrook Avenue, which we're going to see a lot about. The train yards were behind here. We'll see a bunch of this stuff, but and then Broadway. Now, when you come down Broadway, you can see the crick, as the natives say. I'm not allowed to say that as far as Kara's concerned, but she's not here tonight. This is the bottom of Broadway. This is the back of the old Cornell headquarters, steamboat headquarters. This building we'll see a detail of. In fact, it's back there. And just a little bit of a background. And more than a few times, I'm going to go back and forth. I'll go forward, back, so you sort of get your bearings, and then you'll see more details.
Just a little quick story on the Cornell building. Everything, can you imagine this? That building was the dynasty headquarters of practically everything around Rondout and Kingston. It was where the Cornell Steamboat Company, the Ulster and Delaware Railroad, the Bluestone Companies, the ferry, the trolleys, all kinds of land building that were built on land deals and stuff. That was the headquarters of all of that. That was run by this dynasty family, the Cornells and Kirkendalls. Would you believe that in that picture that you're seeing right now in October or November of '65, all the records of the companies that I just described to you were all still intact, going back to before the Civil War, inside that building in the top floor. I cleaned them out within about a month of when this picture was taken. No, it was October '66. They tore the building down in March of '67. And I got all the records out from the railroad and the steamboat and everything else. About 5 years ago, I donated most of it to the Friends of Historic Kingston. It was all one-of-a-kind stuff. I found old leases and things from the ferry boat terminals going across the river to Rhinebeck in there from 1809, 1805. There's all this documents was all still in there. The minute books from the railroad, the steamboat company, the letter books, several letter books of Cornell's personal letter books. And all that was still in there when this photo was taken. Amazing.
And Gene is a wonderful historian. And now I got to add two more things since he stayed on there. So basically, right over Gene's shoulder is where 9W today comes in and just goes right. If we were there today, you would,
Right there.
and it lands right here where this mansion is. There's like a hill there, natural hill.
That's the old Hasbrook mansion. Originally, it was the Thomas Chambers house, his last house in Rondout. And it goes way back, and that was all abandoned for decades before this picture was taken, that particular house. And it hits the hill, or the bridge, the 9W arterial bridge hits the hill right at where the house was. They wanted that house gone. It was one of the first things to go.
And right here, this photo, and in the booklet, this photo here is Gene standing on the roof of the Cornell building. So that's where he is actually looking there. Now Orlando.
Yeah, it's the Cornell building there again, too.
You can see a little close-up of the Cornell, what we were seeing. The parking lot on the left, so is Gallo Park today. So if I'll just go back one and you look, see on the left is those brick buildings, and there they are closer. And so we're going to see those in detail coming now more. And this building right here, I just went back one. So now we're seeing this. This always reminds me of Venice for some reason, and it's even on the water. You want to say anything about it?
Yeah, I kind of call this my jigsaw puzzle picture. It would make a great jigsaw puzzle, wouldn't it? But here's an interesting thing, just a little interesting sidelight about this building. Notice here, there isn't a single window broken in this building. In October the building was torn down in March of '67. The picture was taken in January, 2 months before it was torn down. It had been abandoned for years. I was all through it years ago when I was a kid, because it was still that was the old Johnson Awning Company. And I remember I had to go down there with my father to pick some stuff up at the awning place. But the thing is, though,
Sorry, I think I pulled, Nicole, I think I pulled this out. I was trying to get it out of the way a little bit, or Sarah.
I was just thinking, the amazing thing was that nobody busted the windows out of it. The kids didn't do that kind of stuff in Rondout in those days. I mean, people were, today, it would be full of graffiti. There was no graffiti back in 1965, 66, 67. Graffiti was ahead of the game, so to speak. Or that was another 5 years ahead before graffiti started in the early 70s. One of the most famous graffiti artists from New York just passed away this past week, and his obituary was in the Times or during the week. I guess it was last Saturday, a week ago. Anyway, you want to read the story of graffiti and its history and when it occurred. That's a great little spot to find it, because he didn't start actively doing graffiti until around 1970 or so. That's when basically graffiti on buildings started, and on subway cars, everything that we know of graffiti today. So that's another reason why you see the Rondout that you see in these photographs, is that there was no graffiti, yet good film, Kodachrome film, which this was the best stuff to get at that time for an amateur, was only just becoming available to the amateur photographer like myself back in the late 50s, early 60s. So you only had about a 20-year window where you had this genteel weathering, so to speak, instead of graffiti. Or instead of, as I said, another sociological thing is the broken window. Kids wipe out a building like that in just a couple of days, a couple of hours sometimes. Not back then.
And this is just looking slightly to the left of the one we just saw.
This is where the
From
Mary
here.
Powell used to dock for years. Docked down in Pankaki years later, but the Mary Powell dock used to dock there.
known as, go ahead.
Well, it was actually docked in 2 or 3 different places.
Yeah,
around it. That-
Sunflower Dock across the way, and it was known as Queen of the Hudson.
Yep. There's a genuine Delaware and Hudson Canal boat as of 1968, I believe I took those pictures. And there was actually, that was the spot where that was the graveyard for the Delaware and Hudson Canal boats after the canal was abandoned in 1898. They brought all the coal boats to Rondout and they put them in what they called the Sunflower Dock on the south side of the creek or Slatesburg. And you could still see the remnants. Now, this is a real dead low tide. This is an unusually low tide. You went down there on an unusually low tide, you could see all the boats. And a lot of them are gone now. They cleared a lot of it out of there. But back when these pictures were taken, there were still scores of boats down there. Yeah. This was just happened to be one you could get close to.
And you can see on the upper right is the water treatment plant, which we'll see some other shots later. So now just a few more history ones. You could see the Cornell Mansion up in the middle top part. So, and then here's Broadway. This is where Rear Center and Art Society of Kingston are. So that's Broadway. So all of this went in Urban Renewal, everything below that line.
This shot really gives you an idea of the density. The density was huge. A lawnmower salesman wouldn't get him to do anything in this place.
Hasbrook is down here. It's out of the shot. It's a little below.
Yeah, right here.
Here's the train,
Yep,
and
there's
it's
the
just
train,
below here.
I think use your cursor to point.
Oh, is that helpful?
yeah. Oh, yeah, there you go.
How's this? All right, enough playing. No. So here is the Cornell Mansion,
Mhm.
and the stairs are still there on Word Street. If you notice, if you're driving down Word, here's what today is the park, and here is where Rear Center is. Art Society of Kingston replaced this building in the 20s. Here's the U&D Ulster and Delaware Railroad. We're going to see down here, and the question was Hasbrook, which is kind of, I think it's down just below.
Actually, these are the backs of the house on the east side of Hasbrook, and it lays
This
kind of
could be,
like a little
oops,
trench.
I
There's
clicked.
Hasbrook right
I
here.
clicked one here.
Yep.
But Hasbrook, I think, is right in here.
There you go.
And then here you can see, so this is now looking, if I go back, you're basically just looking again to the left. You see the creek in the upper right here? So Sarah doesn't get mad at me. Here's the, that. And now we're down further. And so a couple of things notable here. This is a Beale Street. Here's Broadway right here. Here's a Beale going up to where the bridge today, the Word Street Bridge is right here. The synagogue that some people might know that was turned into housing is replaced this church. And then this is the first, I like to say, this is the first Presbyterian church. And then it was replaced by this one, which is the second First Presbyterian Church, kept the same name. But by the 50s, it was torn down to make a gas station that you know right before you get on the bridge. And Gene has a few photos. We won't see them today.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you want to note here is, and here's that Chambers Mansion that Gene mentioned, where 9W comes right, lands right here. And this is the mills that we're going to see. And so Hasbrook is right here. We're going to see that in a minute. And the railroad turns into going to the yards right there. Now we're in the yards and back here. So this is where we just were looking, where I pointed out is just behind this building is the mill. We're going to see this building in a minute. This is all Hasbrook Avenue. And at the end of that today is where the Maritime Museum is. It gives you a little sense of it. And this is the Rondout station that was torn down by the late 30s already.
Mm-hmm.
You want to add something, Gene?
I was just going to say that looking at this picture and the previous one where all the buildings where we're looking down off the hill, these pictures that you see here were taken by one of your very early amateur photographers in Rondout. And amateur photography was just in its dawning, so to speak. But they were taken in 1885, the pictures were. And this man here was named Henry B. Snyder. And he was the paymaster for the Delaware and Hudson Canal. And his father-in-law was the person who owned the Newark lime and cement company, the Tompkins family. They lived in Pankaki, which was the mansion is still there yet today. These people had money and they had good jobs. And it gives you an idea of how, you had to have something to be an amateur photographer, even back in those days. There's all glass plate negatives, very expensive equipment and everything to get together. It was not an easily done thing. And he mostly, like I say, he was strictly an amateur because he worked for the canal. He didn't have a photo shop. But he took some of the best stuff from the 1800s during those years. I got a lot of his pictures in my collection home. In fact, I managed to get his family collection of all the family photographs too. I found them in an antique shop out in Tilson. And that's how I got a lot of my Henry B. Snyder.
Of Pankaki. In fact, one day Gene and I want to do a presentation of them. He has about 100 of these mounted photographs. And one of the coolest things is, since it was family photographs, you know how like everyone had to stand still and they're very serious. Mm-hmm. And then there's 2 shots of them cracking up after. You never see that shot and other things. And so here's Gene's shot of almost exactly this exact position, not exactly, but very close. About, I guess it would be 70 years later or so.
Yep. That was taken in 1968. That is the original sewer plant where the greenhouses are. And of course, that's the old Cornell Steamboat Company building along the creek. These Quonsets, this is what I would call a 3 photographs in one. This was a panorama that I took 3 photographs. Stephen connected them all together, and he even took the warp out of the Quonset huts when he did it. I was there when he did it, and you could actually see the curves. The curves go straight because when you got 3 photographs one by one, you're going to get some distortion. And he took the distortion right out before my eyes. I was amazed.
And the screen added it back in.
Yep.
So I'll tell you just so if you look right here, we'll see it torn down in a second. So right on Hasbrook, this is where the old freight house was, which Gene will tell you about right here. So behind that is the yard that we just
That freight house was built in 1883. Obviously, a prior building was there, which I've never seen a photo of. But right to 1967, when that photo was taken, well, I was 66. This was a year before. 67, he tore it down in the wintertime, I remember. And all the architectural elements of gingerbread and everything was all still there from the 1880s, right up until it was, long after changed over from the railroad to Kaplan's Bag Company.
And you can see it says Kaplan Bag Company, which took over the Arcade Mills, which we'll see, which was up the block across the street. So one of the things Gene often says is as things were being torn down, it gave him an opportunity to get views you couldn't see before. So like, for instance, that's the building we just saw torn down. He's standing behind it.
These were originally the old Arcade Mills, which from what I've read, this was a big supplier of grain and wheat and so forth for Civil War troops during the Civil War. A lot of milling was done here for food for the troops.
And then if you look just to the left of this building is down Hasbrook.
Now this is interesting here.
So
here's a conundrum. Here's a conundrum of history that I have not been able to solve yet. The Arcade Mills were supposed to have made feed for the Civil War troops. We're talking early 1860s. The railroad wasn't built until 1868. They must have. The only thing I can come up with, because these are the original buildings for the mill. The only thing I can come up with is they must have reconfigured the architecture on the building to let the railroad through, because that's what has happened here. The railroads all got corners taken off, or the buildings got all corners taken off for the railroad. But like I said, they made food for the troops. Something's amiss there. There's a story. It's going to be interesting if we ever find it out.
And again, this is Hasbrook, and the D&H is about to go into the yards. And just outside is the building we just saw. And here's the Chambers Mansion. And again, 9W slams right down and lands right here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's looking towards that little view where we just were pointing out the building, the strange side here.
Mhm.
That's looking from Hasbrook down Mill Street towards Broadway. So your back is to what we just saw, that corner. I love this shot. And it also gets, because Gene also went in these little blocks too. He didn't just do the bigger buildings, the important ones, which he did do. But you can see the little neighborhood, smaller buildings behind. Now we're set that same corner here that we were just describing, the funny corner here of the building with the railroad going into the yards to the left, and that's Hasbrook. We're about to see these buildings that got freed up by the buildings across the street being torn down, and here's the Maritime Museum today. That little street is still sort of there.
Yeah. Yep. That's the, that right in there's some new housing put in, and the street only goes doesn't even go up as far as the railroad. But, and that's the Slate Mansion across the creek in the woods. Yeah, right there. You can see, that was where I was standing for that picture looking through the trees.
That was the senior home here.
Yeah, that was Van Horn's nursing home for years.
And so keep an eye on these buildings right here. We're going to see a panorama of that standing right across the street. And there we are.
Yep, there's, that's 4 different photographs, all stitched into one. And this is Griffiths Hall. Griffiths Hall was built as a public speaking hall for because back in the days when that was around, the Civil War and afterwards, and even before, several of these buildings predate the Civil War. Of course, with the type of entertainment that we take for granted today, being totally absent from life, speakers being brought in for various subjects was a big thing. And I found an article in one of the 1800s Kingston Daily Freeman's where Mark Twain was at Griffiths Hall tonight. And that's the kind of caliber of speakers you'd get. And there's been several other people that have been very, very famous that have spoken in Griffiths Hall. That was one of about, I think, at least 4 different halls in Rondout alone.
And Kingston had 3 opera houses, 2 downtown and 1 uptown.
Yep.
So this is looking back up the street from East Strand. So, West Strand is still extant, right, where Savona's is. So this is a block east at the bottom of Hasbrook, and you can see the Mills is just at the top of it, right in here.
Yep, there's the Arcade Mills. This is a good shot that shows the architectural elements lasted right till the very end, till they were torn down. I mean, this is the original stuff, the original windows, original cornice work, the minarets and little belfries and so forth, right down to the iron columns. Those iron columns were only made like 2 blocks away from where this picture was taken. There was a foundry there, the Rondout Ironworks, and they made, I think, 90% of the iron columns that held these buildings up on this ironwork buildings.
And you can still see some of them on the stoops. And Gene took some, but if you walk around Rondout, if you look like at the bottom here, you'll see Rondout Ironworks. And there was one more thing I was going to say, but you'll see the next thing of the buildings as they were torn down here. Oh yeah, just to underscore what Gene said, because he always has told me this over the last 10 years over and over and over. No, but but it's so important is that what made Rondout so unique and so much more of a loss was exactly what he just said, where look at all the windows, nothing was replaced, because no one was using this. So it wasn't, in most places there were old buildings and then replaced with plastic signs and things. Everything was really intact. So they could have restored this to a real
This is
gem.
an interesting point to make, just why this. There's a why to this too. I mean, this is actually a reason. Because Rondout, before the D&H Canal came in the 1820s and late 1820s, was nothing but farms. That's all it was. There wasn't even nothing more than a couple of glorified sloop docks, and that was it for farmers to ship their goods. There was no things like this. Anyways, the canal came, the canal went in 1898. By 1918, we'll say World War I, it was basically a ghost town. It was a lived-in ghost town. People still lived in the buildings, and they still had small mercantile establishments and things like that. But the point is here is that it died very early. It died before there would be any retrofitting of architectural elements. You know, nobody was going to bring in Mylar for the windows or any of the siding or anything like that. I mean, it all died before anybody would possibly spend good money to bed on a dead town. And that's why Rondout looked like it did right up till when it was torn down in the 1960s, because there was no retrofitting at all.
Now we'll stand from just to the left, looking back at these buildings as things continue to be torn down. So you're basically just behind us on the right would be the Maritime Museum. And again, just another little bit of things going on here. So here's where we've been oops. So this is Hasbrook here. This is the Maritime today, the Maritime Museum. We were just looking at this corner, looking up Hasbrook, the hall Gene was mentioning, the Mill Street that goes all the way across. We're about to see soon this building at the end of Mill Street is B&H. Oops, I keep D&H Market and the Rondout Savings Bank is right here. Here's Savona's, so you have a little better sense. And you can see again, as we said earlier, that the bottom of Broadway was blocked by the Cornell building. And here's again the Chambers Mansion where 9W comes in contact right here.
Just a note before you go to the next picture. This was a photograph that was on the front page of the Daily Freeman right before they started demolition. And it was, to me, I always thought this was the ultimate air view of Rondout. And it was taken by a fellow who owned a business in town here called the Photo Workshop. And it was right on Broadway, just up a few blocks. And his name was Roger Lyndhurst. And he did countless numbers of weddings and all kinds of different portraiture. But he did get out and do other things like this too. And this was always, I thought, one of his best pictures.
So, I meant to go back here. So if you look here, see the bank here, this was the National Bank of Rondout as opposed to Rondout Savings Bank. And that we're going to look at this other side. So this was Ferry Street. It was a 1-block street here. And then this is East Strand. So now we're looking at from here, looking back this way. So the other side of the bank. And as Gene said, most of those, not tonight yet, but almost all of those stores from East Strand to Ferry, you could walk through the businesses. So now we're on the opposite side looking, the creek is behind.
You see at the top, it says Hasbrook on the tin work up on the top of the building. That was originally the Hasbrook building where they had, I don't think they had a variety of different things they sold in there, but it was a very early company or a very early families that had businesses in town. And then Fowler took over for the hardware store. And that was like the main preeminent hardware store for the city of Kingston for many years. I know when I was a little kid, my father used to take me in there and we'd go rustling through the nail bins and everything else. A real old time hardware store. Eventually it became Fowler and Keefe. And it was Fowler and Keefe when I was a little kid. And then they moved up to Smith Avenue right next to the railroad crossing. And that was Fowler and Keefe there. But that's where it came from right there though. It's many years ago. Along the creek with the Cornell building, and notice the tin work over here in the Crosby building, old stuff all the way. That was the old Comanche Club right here across from the Freeman, and of course the West Strand, which was, thank God they saved the West Strand. That's about the best thing that was saved from Rondout, and only because it was in the geographic wrong spot. It was not Broadway East, it was Broadway West. We'll do that later. That was the attitude of that stuff. So consequently, time didn't take too long to show what an abominable job and idea urban renewal was. So Broadway West never became. And consequently, we're all the richer for that because of the lovely buildings that were saved.
And this little street was called Canal Street. And here's the mansion again where 9W comes in today.
Yeah, that's Broadway looking down toward the B&F Market and the bank, the Rondout Savings Bank, as opposed to the Rondout National Bank, which you saw in the Strand. This building here was the Stone's Liquor Store at the bottom, and I keep forgetting. It's like Weber's Drugstore was still in business when I was a kid. I used to go down there and buy stuff. Back then, you could go in and buy your parents cigarettes. But it was just a different old time drugstore, and I never did find out what became of that lovely sign.
And here's a Beale Street. And recently, a couple of years ago, for a long time, it was Skilly Pot Antique. And today it's the wonderful Rosie General, which has excellent cookies and food and a sweet family. And this is the other side of Mill Street that we saw the mill on. It ended on Broadway on this side. And then we're going to see these buildings, which we all call the mom and pop, which I grew up in Manhattan. And we had the same buildings in the late 60s. I mean, the same buildings and stores just like that. Now we're going to see a bunch of angles coming down and up. You want to add something to that?
Was that now?
Did you want to add something?
No, that's pretty much it.
So now we'll see a few different angles of that. So see how this is. It says Epstein's and Forced Meat here, and now we're on that side of the street looking up.
Yeah, Epstein was an alderman for years in the Common Council here in Kingston, and he was there for a long time. I think he was in charge of the Democratic Party, if I recall.
This is one of my favorite photographs, the color and everything. Gene also told me when we first met that he was always like, oh, there's a car in the shot. And now everybody loves the cars, even Gene.
Yeah, everybody goes crazy about the cars. And they used to be in my way all the time. How times have changed. I went out and bought a 55 Chevy of my own years ago.
So that's the other, that's looking back.
Oh, that's
So
my first car right there. I didn't even realize it was
this
there.
one?
Yeah, 59 Rambler. Look at those fins.
And then we were just looking from here down from the Weber and the car that was standing there. And then this is a Beale. So Rosie General is right here. This is that famous kind of overgrown lot that they refuse to do it. Well, this one lady who owns it refuses to do anything with it. So now we'll see looking up further and the other side.
Yep.
So straight up. So you can get that perspective of where those shops we were. The Epstein's was just to the right. This today, again, the empty lot. Now, this wasn't not torn down during Urban Renewal, I learned from Gene, but it was just in not great shape, and they just took it down anyway.
They had to tear it down, otherwise it would have fallen down. It was very, very compromised.
And this originally was an opera house, and then it was the Orpheum Theater. Anyone who was born in the 20th century would remember it, the Orpheum, which was a vaudeville and movie theater.
This one here, speaking of cars, look at how that car's taking a 90-degree turn out of where Weiner's store is there. And it's a big old Pontiac. And notice how it's leaning. That's the way cars, when they went around corners in those days, the suspensions, being what they were, they would always lean. And they don't do it anymore.
And the light is great here, coming from the east, so you know it's morning. And then, so the right side is all in shadow, obviously. And Gene noted it and said, I'm coming back when that side of the street is, and always did this. And I'll go back one so you can see. So that corner, which you could barely tell that that's a shop there, and look at all this detail that he preserved.
Yeah, you had to do things twice oftentimes. And like I said, you would just, say, oh, this is a good time to go, fill in the blanks, something was good, so go grab it.
And things to note here are just to the left with the green bottom. We're going to see that's actually that building over there we'll see that was destroyed. And Gene didn't like doing them, but he caught a few of them. And then the building on the left, on the very left, the kind of 1-2-story yellow brick building. So now we're going to see, because Gene documented both sides of, I've done shows where we're just going up and down Broadway.
This is Weiner's store. Weiner's, the family lived upstairs right till the very end before they tore the building down. I went to school with Julian Weiner.
Yeah, and Julian's father, and Julian is in Lost Rondout, and his father started the business, and Julian is still around, and his daughter and I are friends, Michelle. So now look, we're going to go see the two buildings over there, especially the yellow one you're going to now see on the right side, and we'll see further up, which is some amazing buildings that were lost. These here,
Yep, Stock and Courts.
which was a furniture store.
I did a lot of shots of signs, because signs have always fascinated me. But I always thought that Rondout was such a great collection of names for businesses. You got Wimpy's Bar up there, and up on the corner is Cappy's Market, and down on the Strand is Rookie's Tavern, and it just made the best sign shots.
And by the 40s, Stock and Cord moved to where Fidens is now on Broadway down the block. That's where they moved in the 1940s already. And now we're looking back down. So we're going to do a little series besides this of the B&F Market here.
Mm-hmm.
And now this again at the end of Mill Street. You want to add anything else to that?
No, it was the Rondout Savings Bank was just far and away the last major building that was built in Rondout. And it took away Amy's, what used to be Amy's old store. It was a regular clothing store. And it was built in 1928. It was one of the most beautiful buildings in Kingston at the time, with the old Beaux-Arts form of architecture. And it was a great loss to see. It was still running when this picture was taken. You see the chandeliers inside the bank are still lit. And the liquor store still lit up too.
And all
life was still in Rondout.
Neon signs everywhere. So this is, again, so if we look here on the left, that street coming off is Mill Street. The opposite side, goes to Hasbrook, right? And the mill is there. So now we're on Mill looking towards, and those two buildings, in fact, the three in the center are still there today.
Yep.
And there's the bank on the left and B&F Market, which we'll see more about on the right of the street corner.
Yeah, my father used to sell flowers to Mrs. Manis. They had Manis's Market there. And for years, we used to deliver down there wholesale stuff, because he would grow pot plants for the holidays, and she would take them in. And
Potted plants.
Potted plants, not very, very woozy plants. And Morris Weiner, he used to buy plants from us too. Yeah, we had a good little business going there with them. We were about a half a dozen store owners in Rondout that used to buy stuff from my father, and I'd go along and bring them all in. And bottom of the hill, Rondout, looking up toward the B&F.
So you can see on the left is where Savona's is today. I hate always saying that, but everyone knows it. And then you can see B&F where the Pepsi sign is, right here. So this is, again, where Mill Street comes. And since you know that you can't see the bank because it has that 45-degree angle, now we're going to get a little closer up.
Rondout could be a real pain when it came to snowstorms. I mean, it wasn't so much getting up and down the hills too was bad, but I mean, it was very hard for parking, very hard.
And then the other thing is that has been stated, I think most of you know, that they widened the street by twice. So today, if you want, I mean, when you go down next time, where the median is, the opposite side of the median, if you're on the side that's still in existence, and then you have the street, the median, and then the other side, that's about the width of the whole block.
All right.
Was. Now, B&F Market was allowed to stay. It was one of the last buildings down because the locals, as they were starting to dwindle, but they needed a place to get groceries. I usually often
Broadway West was still in existence. I mean, right across the street. And there was a lot of people lived over there yet, especially around Wirt Street and Aville, and a lot of people were there. So, of course, they had to have some kind of, back then, you didn't even have the malls. Now, the first real shopping mall in Kingston wasn't built until 1965. Of course, the arithmetic doesn't augur well, with half the town's getting torn down in 1967 and 68. So they had to have a plan, a little battle plan for how people could get their food and stuff, because these little businesses were pretty busy. B&F was the busiest market in Rondout.
I often crop this shot, and you'll see the next shot, which Gene shot that way, but I often crop it just to the left of the doors there. So you really feel what it was like. But here you do get a sense of everything that was happening around it. So this next shot is another classic Gene of looking directly at the front with the owner of the store. And this really feels like, so just to the left is the scene that you just saw, but this really gives you the feeling of what it was like through the 40s, 30s, 50s.
This was right at the very end too, because you see they already boarded up windows here, and they weren't boarded up in the other shots. And yet, even in spite of the fact that the end was like just weeks away, maybe when this picture was taken, look at a pile of pots, all brand new pots for sale. I mean, there was still a business.
And the brownstone, again, look at everything is the original, as Gene said. I mean, you just never can find anything like this. We don't know the name of this German Shepherd. So this is that 1865 building that I mentioned, which was just a couple of blocks up. They're prepping to take it down. And like Gene, like I told you, Gene will tell you more, but he really didn't have the stomach to actually do too many of, I thought I screwed up. I'll go back to that one because I put that one by mistake. Go ahead.
Well, this one here, I did take some demolition shots. You kind of had to there wasn't really too much warning because every building down there had a red X on the outside. That didn't necessarily say it was going to happen tomorrow. So, you would hear we kind of had an in with the foreman, who's standing right there. And he told us that was going to go that particular day. And what they did is they took cables and wrapped them all through the inside of the building, through the doors and stuff, and in and out the windows on the outside. And then they would hook sometimes two, sometimes one. And you can see the cable right there. The cable has already gone limp because it made its pull, and here it goes. And they would tear 3- and 4-story buildings down that were, because let's face it, all you have to do is put the cables on the bottom floor. You don't need them upstairs because the bottom, everything just went. One thing about it, then they would bring in the brick pickers, and they would pick all the good brick that they could find, for reuse and stuff. Oftentimes, that didn't work out too well because what would happen, unfortunately, with this cable arrangement they did about tearing the buildings down, the entire roof of a 3-story building would come down whole, as this one is here, and cover the whole pile. Well, you'd have to sometimes they would tear the brick, the roof off as much as they could to get at the bricks, but they lost an awful lot simply because the roof came down whole on, I would say, from what I saw, 80% of the buildings. I can remember being on the Rondout Creek Bridge backed up for the Abil Street light, waiting to get for the light to turn green. A couple times this happened with me. And all of a sudden you'd see this enormous dust cloud come shooting out of Rondout, and you knew what happened.
And this is an incredible, obviously serendipitous photograph with the stop sign there.
Yeah.
You can see the window is still intact here.
This, of course, is the 1865 building, which did that conventional way that I described. And you can see that it just literally tore itself apart on the way down. And the 1865 also was one of those ones where the roof landed whole on the top of everything.
And again, this was the building that
one.
that is this one.
Mm-hmm. This is what was known as the poor man's paradise. It was a junk shop where you went to buy everything that your grandfather threw away, as the sign used to say on the front of it. And it was extremely old. One of the real early dockside mercantile buildings that was built after the canal came in. I would say, just with my knowledge of, dating on architecture, that probably goes back to the 1830s. One of the real early jobs.
This is also another, for me, a powerful photograph with the community, especially there were a lot of African Americans in the community. It was very integrated. That was another major loss about the neighborhood. And you can see the devastation of, the residents walking through this as they're tearing down around them. There's the brick pickers.
Here's the brick pickers. This is on, this is the Cornell building. You can tell by these pieces, real good stone that came out of it. And of course, there's J.T. Johnson's right across the street. Myron took over half of these buildings and stored lumber in them. I can remember going in there with my dad, getting sheets of plywood, and they used to keep the good stuff in there too. He built me a set of bookcases years ago and used all number 1 pine, and it was all stored in the Rondout Savings Bank, or the Rondout National Bank, I'm sorry. And we went in there to get it, I remember. But they had all those buildings all filled up with stuff. And this
again,
is, of course, the Cornell building.
And that's Ferry Street, and we'll see that again as they're, so this is what we were just looking at from the point of view coming back this way, this corner, because again, this is the bottom of Broadway, as you know, and that building that we just saw, the Cornell building, was blocking this whole thing. So if I go back one, so that's there, and then the one to the right is going to go down, and then if you can go 100 feet that way, looking back this way, that's it.
Here's a rear shot. Of course, Forest is all gone now too, but in 1967, 68, the original buildings from the shipyard on the Rhode Island dock were still standing, much of them, which is where they built several Navy boats, and a lot of big ships were built here. Now, today, the trees that are growing where those buildings used to be are as tall as the Wirt Street Bridge. Amazing how it built up so fast.
And if you and coal was stored there as high as the building, the factory behind there for a decade, a century. And also when you look now, when you're downtown and you see this overgrown island, which was basically a man-made island for the canal, and it just looks like this natural island, but that's 50 years of growth or so. And then, so this is the Forest Factory. Back when I first came up here in 1998, they were just thinking of turning the remains of this building into a hotel. It's actually the same people who started the Kinsley and the developers there. They wanted to do that. This is the back of the old fire station. If you know Maria's, until recently, Maria's flower shop is right here.
Yeah, the Armadillo's right across the street. L.F. Bannon's daughter used to be my science teacher in high school. Yeah, Mrs. Russo. But that building goes way back. I don't think the lettering is terribly old as you might think it would be. It's not like the building's obviously a Civil War vintage or pre-Civil War maybe even. But I think the lettering is a little newer than that period. For one thing, I don't think they call them ranges. I don't know when they start. The name ranges for stoves. I'm not sure just when that started, but it's still a fascinating lettering job. Some of this lettering went way back. I mean, there was buildings down there with lettering from ship chandleries that show in Picturesque Ulster photography, the book Picturesque Ulster. The book was printed in 1894. The same letters were on there when they tore the building down in 1968. This is exactly where the 9W arterial crosses under Albany Avenue. In fact, the highway knocked out to where the bar is, right?
Delaware Avenue.
Delaware Avenue, I'm sorry, yeah. Delaware Avenue. And
So let me stop you and then you can continue. So basically, this is Delaware Avenue here and the interchange. So do you know, have anyone done the new, walking or rail trail through the tunnel? Well, this is standing at the edge of the tunnel, as you can see right here. And then 9W is going up this, the big lane highway. And then Delaware goes down the hill here to Kingston Point. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to mention that this is where the engine is exactly where that bridge is that you see that goes across 9W. That's the bridge that never felt the weight of a train. It was a true railroad bridge built to withstand the loads of trains and everything else. But the timing was, the old saying, timing is everything. They didn't have any timing. The railroad had been abandoned a couple of years before, taking coal and stuff down to the cement plant. So the railroad stood abandoned. Another company bought it They were going to have a little short line railroad to serve the cement plant. The whole thing, then they built the bridge, but they hadn't started the railroad up yet. Then the whole thing fell through and the railroad died and nobody ever reclaimed the railroad at all. And so they wound up building the bridge for nothing. The bridge has never felt the weight of a train and obviously never will. Yes, the old Curly's dry goods store on the Strand. I thought it was fascinating with the lettering, and that's all old cloth, old cloth awnings, and the kind that W.G. Johnson Awning Company used to have.
And I just selected one here, but Gene did a series of, wider and so you get the flavor, but we're only seeing the one.
Yep.
And again, this is looking up the whole thing. Now we're going to see a bunch. So wrap it up where I put a few then and now together. And this is from the roof. So this shot here, that Gene, and it's in the little booklet of Gene standing on the roof. This is basically Gene shooting instead of his good friend, Bob Haynes, whose daughter is here today, my friend, and our friend, Gene Haynes, took this Gene shot with that behind, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's Savona here. So if anyone is a little lost. And that's what it looks like today. And then there's a little, whoops, I guess I didn't put it. Anyway, I thought I put those side by side. So that's basically, you saw it at the end of Lost Rondout earlier. And then this really gives you a sense of the difference of looking at the bottom of Broadway, the Cornell building. There it's about to go, right, Gene? The windows are out.
Yeah, that's the winter before they tore it down in March. That was originally going to be the county office building before they built the one uptown.
Glass
The
menagerie.
old glass menagerie that they call it. And because they were looking for an existing building, a cheap way out. You would understand that. So they went to probably one of the most substantial buildings in the entire city, which is that one there, that would possibly be available. But the fact that it was right next to the creek and it did flood out from time to time, they said, "No, we can't do this." And so the county was stuck with the Cornell building. They bought it, but they decided never to put the county office building there. And that's what I managed to get some of the paperwork out of there, like I talked about before. And this is Joe Epstein's store, bit the dust, as you can see.
And those are about a year apart, those shots?
I would say about a year, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, because some of the elements of like the awnings and things over on the sandwich shop and things were gone by then. Another thing too, they tried to do, weren't always successful with. They would break out or take out all the windows, so anybody going in there to pick brick wouldn't get cut to pieces with all that glass. And they didn't always do the total job, but they did a job there, obviously.
And the other thing that I like to mention in these presentations is, we all know the outside of the buildings is what we interact with more, but there was stained glass, all kinds of woodwork. Mm-hmm. Each house had a potbelly stove, unique. Each one was made, custom made. Mm-hmm. Tons of tile work, all kinds of things that are lost that is kind of forgotten. So you can see basically the width of that's like Art Society of Kingston is just to the right of the one on the right. And then we'll see this shot on the left by itself.
This particular shot, or this particular building here, originally, well, I don't know about original because some of the stuff goes back a long ways, but that particular building at the time in 1905 was the Weston Steam Laundry. That was where you took your laundry and they did the whole steam pressing job and everything else. Anyway, in 1905, this was a big deal. I remember I found photographs of this. The steam laundry blew up, and it took the boiler and it blew it right out the front of the building and put a big hole in the building. And rather than paste it up with bricks, they put this bay window in there. And that bay window is still there yet today because the building's still there yet today. But that's the story of the bay window in the Western Steam Laundry. It just gives you an idea how occasionally things would happen in life, and that's how they retrofitted.
And to wrap it up, we just have a few then and now. That's not Gene, neither one of these Genes. It's actually his friend Bob Haynes shot that one on the
Yeah.
left
Mhm.
for the Freeman. He was a photographer for almost 40 years. Here's the shot I was looking for earlier, just before, so you can see those side by side from the roof of the Cornell. A drone today on the right.
Mhm.
And that's it. I just want to remind everyone about our book. If you haven't seen it, we have some available here. They're also in stores. We have postcards if you want a reminder. And then there's tons of stuff in here. It's 500 pages, almost 1,000 images. On the left, you see history of Ulster County and Kingston, of course, the story of historic Kingston. And each page is unique and or 4 years of research, Karen and I. There's some of Gene's wonderful photographs. And we also got like here, like the family from the store, we got their photographs and we've combined these things together to tell the story. Some more of Gene's photographs that are in the book that are highlighted throughout it. And a couple of more. And if you want, you can see a bunch of spreads on our website again, and I hope you visit HudsonValleyHistoryAndArt.com, and under films in particular, those 40 films are available about artists and a lot of photographers. And that's it. If you have questions. Thanks, everybody. Anyone? Go ahead.
So, Gene, you mentioned that it was the 19 teens when the D&H Canal had gone out of business and the economy just somewhat collapsed.
Right.
And Stephen, you talked about like how it retained or it had that special integrated community. I'm wondering about in terms of between the end of it when it was taken apart for Urban Renewal and the teens, between that period of time. What would, I know that now, like we lost a lot of buildings and there really aren't a lot of useful shops down at the waterfront. It's more sort of touristy, luxury sort of stuff. And then, of course, we don't have a lot of housing and we obviously lost a lot of housing. What would you say in terms of like, what percentage of businesses alone, useful businesses, alone did we have then? What do we have now? What percentage do we have now based from compared to then? How much have we
A
lost?
fraction, right? Gene?
Yeah, I would say a fraction. I think what comes to mind is there's a lot of dining down there.
Yeah.
So dining has been the one thing I think that more than any one single thing that helped to kind of like bring things back to a degree, lessen the blow, so to speak, of loss. But, you know, I mentioned one time during there, I mentioned about how the very first shopping center in Kingston wasn't built until 1965. That's what we called the Brits or Uptown Kingston Shopping Plaza. Before that, that's the only kind of stuff you had. That's what you had. It was that type of stuff. It wasn't in Rondout. It was on Broadway here. Or, of course, Wall Street, which was like the totally iconic place to go for, you know, a Friday night. And but all that stuff went downhill too once the shopping centers started getting in. And once they got hold, everything kind of fell. You know, not just, you know, of course, Rondout was gone. They tore it down, but the rest of the town too took a great loss. So it really was never in, you know, in the line of the future thinking. It was bad thinking, urban renewal. It really was.
And it's what Jane Jacobs wrote, Death and Life of Great American Cities in 61. Like,
Right.
They could have known.
Yeah, well, you
had
see,
that information.
Interesting note about Jane Jacobs. I've studied her quite a bit too, because what she had to say was a lot of what went on here. One thing about Jane Jacobs, go to the source of all this type of thinking, Robert Moses. who was running wild in the streets back in the 60s and demolishing everything in sight. Well, the man who wrote the biography of Robert Moses, Robert Caro, which is one of the greatest biographies that's ever been written in history, I think, never even mentioned Jane Jacobs' name. The book came out in 1966. So we're talking same framework. So, you would think, well, why wasn't Jane Jacobs listened to? Well, if Robert Caro hadn't heard of Jane Jacobs, nobody heard of Jane Jacobs. So the way I always looked at it. I was amazed when I heard that. Because I read the book. I know it's true. And,
The Power Broker.
yeah, The Power Broker. That's the
And,
name of the book. And it was a
yeah, and then-
fantastic expose of Robert Moses. And,
An impressive book. I have to
Oh.
listen to it on Audible.
Yeah, it's hard. I know, it's hard to wade through.
Yeah. mhm. It's still in print. You can still go to
Yeah.
almost any bookshop and buy a copy of it today. Amazing book.
And and then most of the business, as most of you know, was the canal with coal, and then there's the bricks and iron, and so all the industry, boat building and art were gone, and so that's why the place went down. Anybody else?
I always wondered, how Urban Renewal came to a place. Did the city petition the government to come in and do a study and make a decision? Did they just go around and sort of pick a place and decide? How did that?
It was a
work?
political thing to a large extent. I mean, I think the city greeted them, there was pretty much as the city the size of Kingston could throw out open arms, I think they did. And of course, there was a procedure being a federal,
It was
Trust
open like a
me.
grant, like today, like the ARPA grants. that
Yeah.
They're saying, hey, there's money available. You want
Yeah,
it?
right. And-
What's your plan?
yeah, all through Rondout, all through the area here, you were hearing the ringing, the calls, how can you not do this? It's free money. And of course, common sense showed what a terrible idea the whole thing was, but by then it was all over with.
Very specific question. Today's bike trail
Mhm.
follows which line? The D and H?
No, the UND, Ulster and Delaware,
Mhm.
the
Yeah, Ulster.
Ulster and Delaware
yeah.
Railroad.
So then the D and H rights way to the
That was the
Seagoing?
canal.
Is that just a
That was the
railroad?
canal.
Yeah, the D&H Canal. Yeah,
There was a railroad
there was-
that's confusing.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the railroad, we're talking the turntable and everything.
Yeah.
right?
that was the Ulster and Delaware. Yeah, the one with the turntable and everything. And the D&H Railroad never was anywhere near here. The D&H Railroad was the outshoot of the D&H Canal Company, which ran in west of the Catskills from Pennsylvania, carrying the same coal for the same people that the canal had used to. But, in the 1890s, by then, it was obvious that the canal wasn't anything like it ought to be as far as, getting things there quickly.
You didn't have to stop in the winter when it
Yeah.
froze.
Right.
That one shot when you're looking at, I think, east on Mill Street to the
Mhm.
trestle that the bike trail
Right.
kind of crosses. Didn't it say New York Central? Had they absorbed
Yes.
the other road then?
Yeah. The Ulster and Delaware was sold to the New York Central in 1932. And that's when they made, most of the facilities that were in Kingston were just torn down. There was no need for the shops and the various other buildings that, because they were just, the maintenance was taken elsewhere.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
So, if you see what it's like in 1965, 66, 67, what would it have been like 5 years before? Like, how many of those, are all those little shops in operation?
Yeah, I can remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Port Ewan. And when I was a kid, on Saturdays, my mother and my aunt and my cousin, the four of us would walk across the old Wirt Street Bridge over to Strand and Broadway Hill and so forth, and we would shop down there. They were all running, and they would be running late at night. The lights would be on, everything. And we're talking, well, just for arbitrary sake, we're talking 1954, 53, 52.
And could you take the bus there?
Yeah, I don't think they had bus service to Port Ewan back then. No, back then you didn't have a bus. But, it was, it wasn't that much of a walk. I can remember we would walk from the middle of Port Ewan to the Strand. We'd be there within an hour. It wasn't a big deal. So the weather was good. Yes.
Gene, what percentage of the Broadway East buildings do you think the rating document?
What? Is that-
What percentage of the Broadway East, like
Oh.
out of the ones that got torn down, how many do you think you grabbed?
I think I grabbed anything that was interesting to me, and most of them were. I kind of tended to get away from anything that wasn't architecturally stimulating. You know, I didn't do there was a lot of, when they talk about the buildings, they included, like I said before, every outhouse and every shed and everything. And, you know, obviously they weren't that stimulating, but and now I wish I had taken some pictures of some of them. But I would say I got better than half of them, maybe 3/4 of them, as far as all the standing buildings.
Is that it? Well, thank you all. Thank you, Seth. Oh, one more.
Yep.
An interesting
Ruth.
thing was the fact that all of the windows were still in place.
Mm-hmm.
However, I did a lot of restoration work down
Mhm.
in Rondout. None of the buildings that I got involved with had one piece of copper left in them.
Oh, yeah, copper was big, yeah. And I can remember the guy who was in the picture there, and I pointed out, who was the foreman on the whole job, you know? If you slipped him a couple bucks, you had anything you wanted. I remember Bob Haynes and I bought, if you could call it that, an entire building for what we could strip out of it and what we wanted. And that was the way it was done, you know? I don't think there was too much stealing, because it was just too open. I mean, it was just like, you know, day and night, people were around there all the time. And so, but if you greased that guy's palm with a little money, you would have yourself, well, probably copper. We took stained glass out of it ourselves.
And, and I just want to say Ruth and her husband, Alan, who was just here a moment ago, Bendelius, they were pioneers in the mid 80s to transform what Rondout is today. People like her who saw this place like abandoned and said, let's just buy buildings, and then had to really invest in them, sit on them for decades. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Thank you, CPW, for holding this. You have one more question there? Go ahead. Oh, there's Alan over there. Why are we going to Europe? Well, 25 years in Kingston we've done, and I think I've done my bit here with 2 books, and I'll have 2 features by next year or so, and a lot of other projects. And my mother was born in Vienna, and I've been talking about it for 20 years. I'm going to be 62 in 6 weeks, and I'm going to give something a little extra try.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Sarah.
If you like what you see here, please consider becoming a member.
There's books
We have
for
a lot of
sales.
exciting things ahead of us, so please come and find me, take a card, and learn more about CPW.
We're trying to.
And also, if people want to purchase books, Stephen, how does that work?
What?
If people want to purchase books?
Yeah, you can come to me,
Yeah, you can find Stephen
and you
directly.
can also get them.
Thank you,
If
everyone.
you want one now, then I can do it. Thanks.